Good morning to everybody. It's 9:30 in the UK and different times, of course, all around the world on this sunny day in the United Kingdom, but with the first frosts of the winter last night, I think we're ready to start. So it's good to welcome you to this 65th anniversary conference for the Children and Families Across Borders. My name is David Jones and I'm a trustee, a member of the board of Children and Families Across Borders, and it's my job to keep things moving today. We have a host of really interesting and significant speakers, and everybody is on very tight timescales, so we're just going to be able to hear briefly from each of the speakers. The questions and answers, please put them in the Q&A question and answer panel, the question at the bottom of your screen. We will only be taking questions in writing and using the Q&A, and they will come to me from our background team, and I'll then put them to the speakers when we have the Q&A sessions. The speakers won't be responding to Q&As as they go along. We'll be picking them out and giving them to the speakers when we have the question and answer sessions. So we're really excited to be joining. We have over 200 people already signed up. And because we've got such a tight program, we must go straight on. So it's my absolute privilege to be able to invite or to welcome Andrew McFarlane, who is the president of the Family Division for the last 2 years. He's in his home in the UK, but is able to talk to us about in very briefly some of the challenges facing the court. So Andrew, it's my pleasure to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us and for the interest that the family courts are showing in this question of international movement of children between families across borders. Andrew, it's all yours for the next 5 minutes, I think. A real challenge. Over to you.
Thank you very much, David. I'm really pleased to be connected with CFAB and to be supporting this excellent conference. Well done to each of you for taking time to attend. It's a very rich agenda. CFAB is an organization of which I am a great fan. It is unique and it fulfills a vital role, not only in our jurisdiction, but across the world. And we're very fortunate to have with Carolyn Hausman and her team experts who are committed to enhancing and supporting the work that you all do as lawyers and social workers in this field by supporting and encouraging good practice and by sharing information. So well done, CFAB. The two big issues facing me and facing all of us in different ways are, of course, COVID and Brexit. But I hope to give, in the short time I've got, a positive message about each of the two. Dealing with COVID, first of all, as you will know, the family courts in this jurisdiction, from day one of the lockdown in March, carried on working, and we were able, even then, to undertake about 40% of the cases that we would otherwise have been hearing. And that has carried on and expanded so that we now not only work remotely, but we work back in court buildings insofar as we can in a safe environment. We've learned a lot. We didn't have sufficient kit to work remotely. We didn't have sufficient software, and we hadn't really got the experience of doing it. And we've learned a lot and developed a lot in the last 9 months. And we've taken what I'm pleased to feel is a very positive step in having now 2 independent research projects undertaken by the Nuffield-funded Family Justice Observatory into the impact of remote working on professionals and, more importantly, on the parents and family members involved. And that's not all good, but it's a healthy thing for an organization to hold a mirror up to itself to ask, how are we doing? And we've learned from that and will continue to learn. One good thing about the development of our skill and comfort in remote working applies directly to the international field. It's now much more possible for courts to engage with parents and experts and witnesses and other family members who are abroad, but they can now join in court proceedings in England and Wales in a way which really wasn't on our radar screen to a large extent before. I recall quite a lot of hearings over time with people joining down a phone from India or Australia or wherever, and that is a hopeless way in terms of proceeding now that we can see video conferencing is readily available. I see that as remaining long after COVID. We won't go back to lower tech ways of working where remote hearings are necessary. But we have a massive backlog in our system now, built up by the inability to do all the cases early on, and by the fact that remote hearings seem to take longer for the judges to undertake. And we've got two big projects addressing those domestically, which I won't trouble you with now. But the message from COVID is that we are coping, and I'm really proud to be part of a justice system which has continued to deliver as best it possibly can for children and families in these difficult circumstances. Well, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, as it were, along comes Brexit, and I hope we're ready for Brexit, just as we were potentially ready when a deadline date was penciled in earlier times. We anticipate that the jurisdictional issues which are currently determined under the Brussels 2A regulation will largely be determined in the same way under the 1996 Hague Child Protection Convention. The structure and content of the two are roughly equivalent. There will no doubt be cases which have to work out the detail and maybe some cases on forum conveniens, but we're not expecting a surge of work either around the end of December or the beginning of January. We hope that we'll be able to work through the developments at an ordinary pace. In terms of the future, this presents the opportunity now to develop the 1996 Convention and mould it in a way that is most effective for the protection of children and families. And so that's, as ever with the law, when something new comes along, it's a challenge, but it's not without its own interest and even excitement. It's hard for a lawyer to talk in terms of excitement, but there we go. So those are the two big issues that we have. You are concerned to a large degree, with children across borders, placements abroad, or young children coming to this country. We hope that the provisions of the 1996 Convention are sufficiently close to the Brussels 2A regulation to be easily transferable. Both require prior consent of the country abroad to which a child is proposed to be sent. It's Article 56 of Brussels 2A, and that's mirrored in Article 33 of the 1996 Convention. So you will still need to ensure before sending a child abroad that you have the prior consent of the receiving jurisdiction. More generally, it will remain the case that early legal and immigration advice about the family's circumstances, either coming to this jurisdiction or going to a placement abroad, is as necessary as early and thorough social work assessments are. Often these issues of law or immigration come up all too late, and they delay the placement that would otherwise, in social work terms, be seen to be necessary and indeed, in some cases, urgent. So I would urge you all not to take time before you look at the legal and immigration consequences. I could say more, but I won't, because I suspect I've already taken more than 5 minutes. So I leave you where I started, in congratulating CFAB, but in congratulating you in joining, each of you, this conference today. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you very much for picking up those two issues. And I know for some of our international colleagues, I see we have around 240 people online at the moment. that the speed of decision making in the British legal system is a challenge for some other countries. So we may well come back to that later on. Of course, we in the UK see that as important for children, that we shouldn't leave them stranded for long periods while the law works its way through. But it's a real challenge for us. And some of those international dimensions now we're going to hear about from Mary Baginski, who is joining us. Mary is a long-term colleague, so nice to see you, Mary, and welcome. She is a senior research fellow at King's College of the University of London in the Social Care Workforce Research Unit that's done a huge amount of work around the international workforce. And Mary's going to talk to us about some of the issues of globalisation. I know she is around, but I don't see her on my screen. So Michael, who is the background wizard, enabling us to move between our different panelists, is no doubt, as we speak, finding Mary to put up. Or at this point, of course, we're all used to the challenges of working on Zoom, and people disappear when their line goes down. Mary is around, Michael, so Mary, could you raise your hand? We know you're there, but Michael is just looking for you. Sorry to be pausing while we sort this out, or has...
I could do my speech again, David.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, or indeed flesh it out. I don't know, Andrew, while we're waiting, whether it might be worth just picking up on some of those issues, because I know from experience some countries find the speed of our decision making, which is actually written into law. It's not the court's discretion, as it were. There are real tight deadlines and timetables for the English and Welsh courts to make decisions about that. But some countries find that quite difficult. And I know some embassies have even challenged us about the thinking behind it. Have you any reflections on that speed and how elastic it can be?
Well, I do know and appreciate, and I've directly been involved in cases where this has happened, that the way we do things in England and Wales is so markedly different to the experience in other countries that it does cause concern for governments and for embassies. And there's a real need for us to carry on discussion with those countries, with those officials on them, so that there's a communication and an understanding. We would say that the speed at which we are able to progress these cases is too slow. That's where we're coming from, I'm afraid. And we were taking on average for child protection cases over 60 weeks before the reforms came through 3 or 4 years ago, requiring us to do it in 26 weeks. And so that's the direction of travel. Since then, we've been overwhelmed with the volume of work, and we're now no longer able to quite meet the 26-week deadline. So I'm afraid there is a difference in perspective as to the need for speed and the need to avoid delay. That's written into our Act of Parliament.
Indeed, and the reason behind that is that for very young children particularly, any delay in forming relationships is a problem for development, and they need stability as quickly as possible. But for jurisdictions where the legal system proceeds slowly and in a measured pace, that's a challenge, and people sometimes get concerned that we're moving so quickly.
And ours is not rigid, and where there are international issues, typically the judge will allow a longer time for assessments abroad, for a fleshing out of what the options are abroad before the decision is made. So typically that would be a good reason for extending the timetable.
And we don't want to disadvantage children who could have a good, secure placement abroad just because of our timetable, which is a challenge. I'm being told that we ought to move on to Shereen Hussein next. So, Michael, is Shereen there? We're hoping the technology is now working.
Hello, everybody.
Shereen, hello, it's David Jones here, and I'm just looking for your picture to come up as well. It looks as if it's about
here.
There it is. So thank you for stepping in, and we'll try and come back to Mary later. But it's really good to see you. You've written so much in the literature about social work and international dimensions, and you're moving to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, but congratulations on that appointment. But you're going to speak to us about the effects of Brexit. Sir Andrew raised that earlier, so thank you very much. And over to you. And obviously, we all got to speak briefly, so thank you for helping with that.
Thank you very much. It was lovely to hear you, Dave, and Sir Andrew as well. And as Sir Andrew said, we are facing two major issues, both Brexit and COVID, and they intertwine in different ways. So I'm going to focus on the impact on social work practice, and in the light of the, kind of significant contribution migrant social workers or non-UK qualified social workers play in England. So I'm going to try to be brief and cover quite a bit of points, and then in the question and answers I can pick up a few things. So the social work operate across borders in different ways. So we've got like people who haven't been qualified in the UK, working in the UK, who come with different education system, culture of working, linguistic proficiency, etc., that are different. But also we have social workers who operate across borders. So from the UK, working with colleagues across borders, working with displacement families, etc. And generally speaking, there has been a significant contribution of non-UK qualified workers in the UK. It peaked just before 2010, if you recall, when we introduced immigration cap. And then from that time, it started to dwell down. But what happened as well was a replacement of the source countries, and we have a lot of replacements coming from within the EU. And then it started to pick up again around 2013, and even with the referendum in 2016, we saw some increases in trends. So it meant that there was people who decided to come during that period and settle in the UK. We don't know much about the latest figures due to different issues, and particularly the move of the registration from HCPC to Social Work England. So the figures are not that current. But what I want to highlight that this, while social work, and I was hoping Mary would have pointed to this, that social workers work in a global context, but social work itself is not yet a global project. The concept and culture behind it varies quite considerably. If we think about Brexit, obviously there are vast implications, particularly in how people would work together, how people can move around borders, and how social workers and immigration system, which is a point-based system, which recognizes social work as a shortage occupation. So we're likely to see more non-UK qualified workers coming from across the globe. However, delays are always there because the system and it's not yet clear, and also the sponsorship mechanisms. And we are already facing high vacancies and shortages within particularly child and family social work in the UK. So that's really, really important. But that leaves a big problem in terms of understanding the supply of social workers. So there has been long concerns about the supply of UK qualified and the introduction of a number of fast speed qualifications, but without understanding, and that never have kind of completely met the needs, particularly in children and families, because it's quite a high kind of burnout, high stress. We know that the workload is huge. So without understanding how the replacement is going to happen in terms of which source countries are coming, the length of the ability of providers to employ, it's going to be very difficult to plan and meet the demand. So while we are seeing this also with COVID and with a lot of movement, particularly around refugees and asylum seekers, there is a huge increasing workload. So we've seen through COVID and lockdown the increase in demand, issues around substance misuse, mental health, domestic abuse. There is a huge demand on current working social workers in it, ensure that there is placement, how to, if EU children has to go back, how are you going to ensure there are right placement where they go, and all these issues increase the workload. And social workers have to keep up with a very fast moving pace of change in terms of policy, in terms of legislations, in terms of even understanding the UK family immigration law, which also is kind of changing, and the way things are assessed. So what I want to highlight here is issues around international child protection as well, and how social workers can work with their colleagues and meet this challenges. One of the things that perhaps we have to bring in is the role of technology. So I want always to look at a bit of positive things, and I'm really glad that Sir Andrew have highlighted this, that one maybe of the positives that of COVID, that we are all now working, using technology, working remotely, which also have a big burden. However, it facilitates this international communication. It becomes part of the fabric of the working. It doesn't remove the barriers. It doesn't remove the issues around cultural understanding, linguistic understanding, and understanding the clues, because social work as a profession, it uses a lot of unspoken clues. It uses a lot of high level of the language. So not only you understand the language, but you understand the use of the language to actually pick up on clues that there is something going on here, whether it's right or whether it's wrong. So what we need to be aware of is the support that we provide social workers during this time. The support for EU social workers because of the uncertainties, and the support we are offering, social workers who already, have been working here for a long time, who are, qualified in the UK, etc. One of the other things that we can look at, particularly during COVID, and take forward is some of the innovations that we could see at local level. So we've seen some local authorities starting to do some innovative practice, particularly around looking at certain groups of children or young people who are at risk of multiple exploitation, and working more with the families. Yet we have to learn new ways to do this remotely, which is not easy. It's very, very difficult. And the usual kind of social networks is quite reduced. So you used to have the children they're still going to school, which is fantastic, but at the first lockdown, it was really horrendous because there was not much external interface, because this is where signs are picked up and contacts made. So it's really important that we use whatever elements we have in a creative way and innovative ways, and to think of new ways to communicate and to reach out. So I guess now social workers need to be more proactive. Local authorities need to be more proactive in identifying risk groups and starting preventative work, rather than waiting for these connections and the kind of referrals to be made to interact. However, one of the real challenges that we face is data. Yes, 1 minute, or yeah, 1 minute. I'll just find a note on data, because it's really important. Because one of the real importance is that we learn how to give children and families voices, and to record the situation and to record the process. Once we do that, in a systematic way, we can then use this for further and future preventative tasks. So I'll leave it here. There is a lot to cover, and I hope to be able to answer some of the questions that would come later on.
Shireen, that was really clear, and thank you for watching. It's quite challenging to keep to time in such a packed program. I'm just saying to everybody who's joined us, we have over 250 people now watching. Please put any questions in the Q&A box. That is the only place we'll take questions. We're not asking people to put their own questions. Send questions to us, and we will then sort them out. We're now moving to some questions. I'm not quite sure what has happened to Mary, because I know Mary Baginski was here earlier. Maybe she's got a problem with her internet. So let's go into questions and answers. There's one question come in the Q&A, and that's about the role of consulates. I suppose the challenge for us and for the UK social workers, you may not be aware how international our life is in the UK compared with other countries. We know in CFAB that we have by far more international contacts with more countries than any other country in the world. I'm sure that doesn't mean that we're unique in having such an international population, but that is a fact of UK life. And changing Brexit and changing immigration law is not going to change that reality for British society. So we have more overseas qualified social workers here than I think any other country. And we have more international dynamics around the family structure, and therefore into the court system. So do you have any comments about consular assistance, Shireen? And then we can perhaps move further into looking at immigration law.
Yeah, I think that plays a part. So we've done a study that was back in 2017, which was a pan-European study to look at how social work operates, and part of that across borders. And obviously, this work will form part of it. But as you said, Dave, sometimes the time it takes, the speed it takes of kind of transferring information and acting upon information can be an issue. But this is part of the package. So you work with the council kind of protection work in foreign councillors, but also you work with colleagues in the municipalities where the other, kind of party exists, and it's complex and complicated. So I don't have more details on the ins and outs of that work, but this came up in our research as part of the package, and maybe one of the as generally the communication between countries, people found that it's quite difficult and delays things to get the nitty-gritty of what's happening. So obviously we one of the issues is try to work with parties and have a communication and again data, because if you collect data in a standardized format, then you can easily transfer it as a starting point. It's not going to be sufficient, but it will be a good starting point.
Yeah. And I think experience in all countries is that if the child is outside your borders, it has lower priority. So Andrew, do you have any observations on consulate involvement and the speed of the process in that sense?
No, I mean, I don't deal with these cases on the ground, so I'm afraid you'd have to ask one of the judges who is dealing with it regularly just what their experience is. I haven't had reported to me difficulties about particular cases or particular consulates, but these are processes that, as Shireen says, do take time, and everybody needs to be eyes wide open to that from day one and start the processes working at the earliest opportunity.
And our own CFAB research on safeguarding inquiries across borders suggested that it does take several weeks, sometimes months actually, for agencies in this country and abroad to get into gear about what's necessary. And a sense of speed and urgency, we need to rediscover that. Shireen, there was also a question about data. I think you were saying this is collecting data about the social work workforce itself, and Social Work England having recently started, but other issues around data?
Yes, I think data I meant two folds really. So one is collecting data on the workforce. That's one thing. But what I meant is collecting data on families in a standardized way and anonymous way. Then you can actually use it to help you in new cases. So you can use it to speed up. And also working with partners across border that you're collecting similar data. So you are starting from certain points. And this is really will work case by case or situations in general. So you have to kind of design, you have ideas around the situations, what sort of data you want. I worked with data even in the UK is horrendous, because you've got like stories, caseloads that when you start to make sense of them in an aggregate level, it becomes a nightmare. And it took us we tried once to use data, and that was adult safeguarding project, and to try to summarize them in a meaningful way. And that was quite a task. But if we start from a point that, yes, you have to have the narratives, yes, you have to do all things, but you need to have some categorization to enable you then to use this further when you look at patterns, you look at where the red flags that would come, and also you communicate across border more easily when the narrative can be lost in the linguistic. So I think that's what I meant. So it's twofold: looking at your workforce, looking at your supply data, understanding the projections of supply so you can kind of plan effectively, but also on the ground to help you as a tool to work with families, particularly across borders.
Yes, thank you. We have another question coming in, and I'm sorry I'm not giving names. There was a question from Sylvia earlier on, and Leon, and I've now got a question from Joanna Pachovic, I think, but apologies about my pronunciation, referring Sir Andrew to Justice Munby's comments earlier about Latvian and Slovakian jurisdictions. It's been suggested in the Q&A that British courts are disregarding some international regulations around Hague and so on, picking up on James Munby's comments. I know perhaps this comes back to the issues we were discussing earlier about speed of decisions. Do you have any reflections on that? I'm sorry, I don't have any more detail, but this is
well, I've read the questions, and clearly the questioner has some substantial issues with our whole system, suggesting that there's widespread breach of the Vienna Convention, and that she has over 100 cases where the UK courts have acted unlawfully. It's very difficult for me to comment on that. Sir James's guidance was absolutely plain. It should be followed. I would anticipate that courts are following the guidance. The lawyers and CAFCAS who are involved in these cases, and indeed the local authorities, they all know about it, and it's the default position. In my seat at the top end of the system, I only get to hear if things are not working satisfactorily, if they're being undertaken unlawfully, as the questioner suggests, if there's an appeal. And so if there is concern that the law has not been applied properly, then we do have an easily accessible appeal system which is there to be used. And it's only by using it that a corrective, if there's a need for it, a corrective message can be sent to courts who have fallen into error. But it's I am surprised that by the suggestion that Sir James's guidance is not being followed. It was very clear, it was very welcome, and it makes good sense. And as I say, I can't say more because I haven't seen any examples of it not being followed.
No, but it comes back in what limited experience I have, which is even less than yours. But is around the time of the time pressures which local authorities here will be experiencing. And it takes time, and it's also complicated to engage with overseas agencies and persuade them of the urgency so that local assessments can be undertaken. Sometimes CFAB can help with that because of our partners abroad who are able to work with us. But it's, and in a way, it's partly also thinking about the needs of the child. And in some places, the timing of the slow pace of courts in some countries is more important than the urgent need of the child for a decision. And the fact that our courts, our legal system, it's not the courts, it's our system, says that the child's need for stability is more important than taking a long time to find a solution is something which some countries find difficult. Perhaps we've got time for one last question or one last reflection. Given that, and this is this, given that we have such an international environment in the UK, it's not the same in every part of the country, but it is actually a very international environment. How can we help the practitioners in this country, social workers, lawyers and others, to become more aware of the cultural issues and to become more culturally competent, if you like? What is there that we can do to help that? I don't know, Shereen, if you have any perspectives on that issue.
Yeah, well, that's a very important issue, and I think there have been a lot of efforts, but the problem that it's not consistent. So we find some effort in the education curriculum itself, building on the Bologna kind of agreement. There have been some stress on the international component. However, when you get to practice, you kind of get into the silos of your nitty-gritty of understanding what is going on, and it becomes amazing sometimes that some cultural issues are not picked up by people who work in a very diverse environment. However, this is getting better. As David said, that we are a diverse environment. However, it's very geographically and regionally. But what I found in my research that there are some very good efforts in certain local authorities. So there is kind of specific programs, particularly when new international workers are coming to do kind of joint kind of British UK based trained and non-UK based trained induction courses to come to touch base on various culture. However, these are usually kind of people are coming in, so we want them to understand the culture of the UK rather than actually people within the UK have a very diverse culture, and people who are qualified in the UK need to understand this diverse culture. So the two things are going hand in hand. And there are lots of work in the curricula here in the UK. But what I would say that this needs to have more coherence, but it's faced with a lot of challenges, particularly the supply issues. So that we found these examples earlier on when there was a work permit scheme and there was active recruitment drive, say from a certain country, whether that from Australia or from any other place in Africa. And some local officers did really good work in kind of harnessing the cultural expertise of this group and also introducing them to the way the system work and the legal work. But now if you're not quite sure how that works, and we found that when we relied more on the European free mobility, that it's really it was hard because people are coming from different countries, not consistency through a certain scheme. So they had to pick the pieces, really. They had to work it out. They have to ask people. And that sometimes can cause issues because it may seem as if they are incompetent, but they are not incompetent. They are actually trying to be better. So I think more coherent work needs to be done on both ways, at the curriculum level, but also at the workforce level when realizing this mobility and diversity of the workforce.
Yeah, thank you. And perhaps last comment in this panel session from Sir Andrew. And do you have any perspectives on the cultural perspectives or the understanding of other systems, and seeing obviously that we know from some embassies, particularly of Eastern European countries, there's quite a lot of concern about the speed of our decision making and whether that is breaking the human rights of some of the children involved. But balancing that is clearly very difficult. Do you have any final thoughts, Sir
Well,
Andrew?
I think we've canvassed the difference in timing and speed, and we would say that to delay may compromise the rights of the children involved. So there's a need to increase and improve the understanding between our jurisdiction and quite a lot, I suspect, of other jurisdictions. More generally, about the importance of the cultural context within each case, surrounding each case. I think that is really important. And knowing how the arrangements a court makes in its court order will land, as it were, in the family, in the community in which the child is going to live, either in this jurisdiction, England and Wales, or abroad, is really very important, because that's going to be the environment in which the child goes on day by day, hour by hour. People probably won't look at the court order very much at all, but the culture and the community will be present as a lifelong experience. And so understanding how one option or another option for the child will play out culturally for the child and impact on the child and the family is important information. And it is wrong, I think, as a judge in England and Wales, to think that's not a problem that we have here, because we're so diverse. We are diverse, and that's a matter to celebrate. But within our diversity, families, individuals still live within quite close-knit communities sometimes. So understanding how court orders for adoption or for special guardianship or for any other arrangement will impact upon the family members and the child is as important in the domestic cases as it is in the international cases.
Thank you. And it's a huge challenge for us. And CFAB's team is there to help people. Our helpline and our resources are there. We have a small team of qualified social workers and very experienced staff who can help agencies, and our helpline is always there. So Andrew, you commented on the role of CFAB. Perhaps you could just finish as we say goodbye in coming back to how CFAB can help in that process.
Well, I made it plain. This is a very rich resource. It's rich in terms of its experience across the world of dealing with these problems, but it's rich in terms of, I've been to CFAB's office and met the team there. It's rich in terms of the intellect, the commitment, the wisdom and understanding that they have of these cases. And so they should be used. It is bonkers to have a case that might engage an international element which is on the edges of the experience of the social workers and the lawyers, not to pick up the phone to CFAB or to go on their website and see whether there's any generic guidance that is there. The fact they've been around for 65 years shows how much we need them.
Thank you. And obviously the Ministry of Justice also has an important role in this as well through the central structures. But thank you very much indeed to Shereen, and congratulations on your new position, Shereen, and good luck with that. I'm sure we'll still see your writing on these issues. And Sir Andrew, thank you so much for your time and for entering into the question and answers. It's good to see our courts are open and open for discussion. So thank you very much indeed.
A pleasure.
We're now going to move on to our next speaker, and we're shifting gear a little bit. And when I'm looking to the side, I'm looking at my other screen, which has got my briefing notes on. And we're now introducing Marilyn Crawshaw, who's also a colleague of mine. Marilyn is going to talk about surrogacy and assisted reproduction systems. Marilyn is based at the university, well, she's now retired, but is an honorary fellow at the University of York, has got huge experience in this field, working nationally and internationally, Marilyn. So it's really good to see you. and welcome, and over to you for your contribution around the issues of assisted reproduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and hopefully you'll start seeing my slides very soon, and congratulations to CFAB on their 65th anniversary. So my first slide, if they're coming, will be explaining who ProGAR is. We're part of BASWA, but multidisciplinary and multi-agency in our makeup, as you will see from this slide, and we've been working in this field since the 1980s. So on to the next slide, please, Michael. There we go. And moving on to our next slide, ProGAR neither supports nor opposes surrogacy per se, but argues that children's interests and human rights should be paramount rather than the driver being something like, for example, supply and demand. So as part of that, we argue that offspring have the right to know the identity of their genetic, gestational, legal and social parents. And we acknowledge the complexity of using the term parents here. That we argue that the process of being told about origins needs to start from the beginning of a child's life, so that as well as systems for later information release at, say, age 18, we need ones that support early disclosure, such as requirement for full biographical information about surrogates and donors to enable raising parents to help children understand their full story. Now, we know that disclosure beyond infancy carries risks, but that is now heightened by unplanned disclosures from the huge growth in commercial DNA testing. And we advocate that intended parents need to be properly assessed and prepared for the additional parenting tasks involved. Incorporating lifespan understanding can reduce outcomes for offspring of intended parents, surrogates and donors, and their current and future family members and networks. So will the way that surrogacy is organised stand the test of time? There is growing evidence, for example, of unanticipated complexities as well as rewards from later life contacts, including where numbers involved are high because of lack of early regulation. But there's a dearth of professional support services. There are questions about whether, how and to whom to release genetic information that later comes to light from surrogates, donors or surrogate-born people themselves. Should it go to the adults at the time of conception or direct to offspring, especially if they're by then adult? So whose information is it? Where does duty of care lie? And how can such exchanges be managed in an overseas context? And we need the social work voice at the table. None of the professionals and organisations commonly involved, such as doctors, scientists, lawyers and brokers, have the child as their primary or independent concern. Now, the tension between adults' parenting desires and needs and those of children is one with which social work is familiar, so we can bring that experience and we can usefully contribute critical examination of concepts and narratives surrounding surrogacy, drawing on our knowledge of complex family systems and relationship dynamics with or without genetic connection. And there is a worrying tendency to generalise from the findings of the very limited existing surrogacy research base. We still know very little of the short and long-term range of experiences and outcomes. And the Making Research Count triangle of evidence-informed practice requires three key evidence routes: research knowledge, practice knowledge and expertise, and information and expertise from those directly affected by service provision. Next slide, please. Such triangulated evidence is stronger about donor conception, so there may be some potential transferable indicators. Next slide, please, Michael. For example, you'll be interested to see on this slide the policy and practice recommendations presented by donor conception and surrogate-born adults from around the world to the UK's 30th anniversary event last November. And I included a YouTube link, and it was on the last slide, I'm afraid, but you will get copies of the slide. So if we move on to the next slide, sorry about this. I've chosen three areas to pull out to illustrate ProGA's work further, and there are further links here. So to start off with, the BASWA's position paper on surrogacy, just coming up to 4 years old, which usefully maps each of its statements against its code of ethics. Next, last year we made a submission to the Law Commission's consultation on UK surrogacy law reform, and their draft bill is due in early 2022. And then last autumn, we co-organised with International Social Services their UK consultation on the draft principles for the protection of the rights of the child in surrogacy. And the drafting of these was recommended by the UN Special Rapporteur on the sale and sexual exploitation of children. So next slide, please. So pulling this together, let me add a few more key issues using child-centred lifespan understandings. Now, overall, parental order numbers, which is the process for the transfer of legal parenthood, suddenly after surrogacy, suddenly started rising in 2008. And that was the year the first overseas application was made, and overseas arrangements now account for just over half. But global movements of surrogacy arrangements with new markets opening up all the time make monitoring especially difficult. Some destination jurisdictions register intended parents on birth certificates as the only legal parents, and some allow no genetic link to either intended parent. By thereby legitimising intention rather than genetic or gestation involvement as a ground for legal parenthood from birth, offspring lose an official trail through which to independently learn of their origins. Now, these birth certificates aren't currently recognised in the UK, but there's no requirement to apply for a parental order if parents are prepared to risk doing without. And applications anyway only require the disclosure of the surrogate's identity, not to the egg donor. International surrogacy typically uses only gestational surrogacy arrangements and anonymous egg donors, potentially raising issues for the offspring of all of these adults. Intended parents, surrogates and donors can be left unaware and unprepared for its lifelong implications. What will it mean to surrogate-born offspring to have donor parents as well as surrogates and raising parents? What if they want contact with both? What about the additional half-siblings that also using a donor will involve, and how will all they feel about it? And how will the distances involved be managed? And what if each of the surrogate, donor and intended parents come from different countries and cultures? Now, put some drivers, possible drivers for gestational surrogacy on the slide here. Now, the first two are poorly evidenced but frequently claimed, and they can encourage the use of pre-birth enforceable contracts. Next one is that some intended parents have been recorded as wanting a child that shares their ethnicity, but prepared to use a surrogate that doesn't and an egg donor that does. But they don't always understand. The child may need to understand the social and cultural context of both surrogate and donor. And for some, the driver is their distance. The desire is to distance themselves emotionally from acknowledging the genetic parentage of their intended child. And research is now emerging of parents being less likely to tell their child about the egg donor than about the surrogate, leaving some children believing their surrogate to be their genetic parent. And we know from researchers some male gay couples not telling their child which of them is the genetic parent, and some commissioning 2 surrogates at a time to avoid choosing which will be the bio-dad first. Final slide. Next slide, please. There is strong commercial interests in this field. So we need the next sentence. Strong commercial interests in this field that can bring the risk of exploitation for all. And we all need to be alert to potentially porous boundaries with child selling and with female trafficking of surrogates. Infants, intended parents and surrogates can all be left stranded, both pre and especially post-COVID. And infants left stateless, but there are no sanctions on those who accept referrals in the first place. Responses to COVID may also lead. We've already heard of at least one case of surrogates being brought to the UK for pregnancy and delivery, leaving their own children behind. And we'll probably see more donated eggs being imported to the UK. There are no minimal international standards or regulation of child welfare and preparation, or even of medical processes. No limits on the number of children being born to a single surrogate and egg donor, and no regulation of surrogacy agencies or data collection, and very limited ongoing support. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I look forward to your questions. And I've included a lot of reading list on the final slide. I understand you'll be getting copies of the slide.
Thank you, Marilyn, for racing through a really complicated field, but an added challenge in the system is now we have children, young people born as a result of surrogacy and as a result of assisted reproduction who themselves are speaking up and speaking for themselves. And that is creating a new element within this debate. I've been involved in some of those conversations myself. And if you then add on top of that, what I'm sure will happen is increasing insurance, life assurance and health assurance interest in the genetic makeup of people, these issues become really, really significant. We've had one question from somebody who's involved in the consular guidance, particularly in parts of Eastern Europe, asking whether there is any chance there's going to be an international agreement around these issues in surrogacy. I know that the International Social Service and The Hague are working on some of that. We may hear about it later, but do you have any thoughts about whether there's ever going to be an international agreement around these issues, Marilyn?
I think it's a very good question, and I look forward to hearing if we hear any more about that later. There has been work going on in it. It's very complicated, difficult work. We know from the work that was done on international adoption just how complicated this is. And I think that when I said that there are new markets opening up all the time, I use the word market advisedly, because there is big commercial interest in this. And there are ways of things going under the radar. We already know that there have been markets that have opened up, they've been shut down, and then they open up somewhere else. So there are different layers of international surrogacy going on. Somewhere it's very definitely targeting developing countries, and somewhere we may see systems that are far more comparable to our own. What is very marked about it, and I hope that any international work does something on this, is that the brokers involved, the people that are running the services, that are recruiting intended parents, they seem to be able to escape sanction. Whenever difficulties come to light, then there was the situation in Cambodia, for example, where it was the women who had been recruited as surrogates that were put into prison. It wasn't the brokers. They were left. And when we look at situations of people being stranded and babies being stranded, which had been covered a lot during COVID, then we need to think about what is happening where people are allowed to enter into these transactions, often knowing the people themselves may not know, but the brokers, the people that are organising it, may well know that they will face difficulties further down the line.
Yes, and it's there's already been reference in the chat and the question and answer about rights of children and the marketing of children. We know that this happens. We know that there are commercial and illegal exploitation of children and families. And often people who are campaigning for particular changes in the law, particularly as you were saying around who should be a name on a birth certificate, are thinking of their own needs, and understandable, it's always understandable, but their own needs and not being aware of the wider context. And that is where the international effort is needed and international agreement is needed. And my own view is that children have a right, young people, all of us have a right to know about our genetic identity. But of course, adults don't always get themselves into situations where they want to tell their children, even in established relationships that don't involve surrogacy. So we're talking about very intimate aspects of our lives, but this has an impact on children, and social workers know that that has lifelong impacts on children. So it's a real challenge, bringing together different issues. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to take any more questions, but there are comments coming through. Just so you know, the recording of this session will be made available on the CFAB website. If you sign up to the newsletter from CFAB, you will get the notification about where that will be available. And we'll try and pick up some more questions as we go along. Well, we're just over 5 minutes behind, which I don't think is bad. So thanks to everybody so far. I think we do now need a break. Those of you who are watching and listening may need to get a drink or get some personal attention to going to the toilet or whatever. I'm speaking for myself here, so I'm going to stop my video for 5 minutes, and we'll then come back in 5 minutes time, and I'll start very promptly with our next speaker, which will be Carolyn Houseman, the Chief Exec of CFAB. So I hope you're ready, Carolyn, and we'll come back in now 4 minutes. Bye for now. Hello, are we ready to go? Oh, thank you. Welcoming everybody back. It's a really short break. Hope you've been able to get something. I've got a cup of tea, which I'm just collecting there. And when I see Carolyn, we're able to go on with the next session. Very conscious we're dealing with some really complicated issues here and not able to answer questions, but it really is important to give so much time to these international issues. So Carolyn, hello, welcome to you, and it's good to be back. I see we've got still around 250 people with us. So Carolyn is the Chief Executive of Children and Families Across Borders, which is the UK partner of International Social Service. And we've also got Tadwinder Sandhu, who's the Chief Executive of the International Adoption Centre, going to talk about some of the international issues around all of this. So Carolyn, it's over to you, and thank you so much for organising all of this and putting it all together for us. Welcome to you.
Thank you so much, David. I assume everyone can hear me okay, and when Michael gets a chance, we can bring Satwinder on as well, because we will be doing, this is more of a panel discussion. I'm very, very conscious that we might be flagging after an hour online. I know it's really difficult to sort of sit there and stare at everyone. So what we wanted to do was have a bit of a discussion and actually start with a poll of the audience. This is going to be anonymous. So when they come up, just go ahead and give your best guess and we'll see the results on screen. We have 8 questions which we are going to run through, which I hope will illustrate some of the challenges that we'll be talking about this morning. And Michael will be queuing up those questions in a moment. I'll let you know what the first one is so you can give it some thoughts as he gets it ready. The first one is, how many countries are there in the world? So just go ahead and put your best guess in there, and we'll see what people think. I can't see any answers coming up. I'm not sure if you can, Michael or David.
Whoops, sorry, I can see the answers. If you want me to say, there's 11%, 12% are saying 174, 27% are saying 213, 42% are saying 276, and 19% are saying 295. So
fantastic.
Around half say there are 276.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you, David. So the correct answer for the 19% of you who are there is 295 countries in the world. Quite a lot. Next question is, how many different nationalities live in the UK? So we know there's 295 countries in the world. How many different nationalities live in the UK? And for those who are questioning, yes, that is from, I can give you the sources. I like that academic rigor. It's the United Nations recognized sovereign states for the last question. In terms of the answers on this one, I don't know if we're able to share those.
So we've got around 37% are saying 234. And then they're roughly equal numbers saying 218 or 275, and 11% are saying 156, but around 40% are saying 234. That's the biggest number.
That's good. I like how people are thinking. They're very international. They're very close. We're 218 different nationalities living in the UK. That's from the United Nations database, and it's based on 2015 data, so it may have changed a bit. but very international country, as we possibly know. The next question, in 2019, what proportion of children in England and Wales were born into a family where at least one parent was not from the UK? The UK being all foreign nations, of course.
And this is the top two are about equal numbers, around 40% each for 29% and 35%.
Great. Pretty good. So the correct answer is 29%. So a third of children born in England and Wales have at least one parent who is not from the UK. That's based on ONS data from 2019, so pretty recent. Next question. How many local authorities across the entire UK explored family abroad for children in their care between 2015 and 2017? Now this one is again going to be a little bit trickier, I appreciate, because you'd have to know how many local authorities have children's services departments across the UK.
Well, remembering, yeah, this is England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Numbers of different 152 authorities in England, but the biggest number, 37%, are saying 45.
Great. All right. Well, incredibly, that is correct. So, and it's actually a bit of a trick question because they don't actually publish the data on how many children in their care have family abroad or where those connections were explored. But CFAB did a Freedom of Information request in 2019, and we had 214 local authorities respond to that. 81 local authorities provided a numerical figure, meaning they were tracking the information. 104 local authorities said they did not hold the information or were unable to access it, leaving 29 local authorities which said that they weren't going to share the information at all, and 45 local authorities which said they did explore family members abroad for children in their care between 2015 and 2017. So pretty low proportion. Let's have the next question, which is how many children were looked after by local authorities, including adoption, in England in 2018-19? I bet most people will get this.
Well, that's always a tricky one.
You think so?
Well, it's split, very divided.
Let's hear.
36%, 37% are saying 87,000, and it's roughly equal for 112,000 and 78,000. The smallest number is 54,000.
So we know that there's a lot of children being looked after by local authorities. The correct answer, according to DFE 2018 to 2019, is 78,150. At CFAB, we estimate that there are approximately 18,000 children in local authority care in England and Wales who have family members abroad. And again, it's a little bit of a rough estimation based on how international the country is, how many children are taken into care, etc. But we came up with this figure in 2017 and have recently rerun the numbers to confirm it. Of course, to be clear, this doesn't always mean that family abroad is the right option for a child, but there is an obligation on local authorities to look to family first, no matter where they are, when a child is moved from their parents' care. Let's have the next question, which is how many children from local authority care are sent to live with family members abroad each year? 78,000 children in care. Maybe 18,000 children with family abroad. Certainly 1 in 3 children in England and Wales have at least one parent who's not from here, meaning they might have family abroad. How many children are sent to live with family members abroad each year? Let's have the answers.
Around 50% are saying it's the lowest number.
113. Great. Well, the correct answer is it's unknown. This is not formally tracked or reported. However, again, when we did that Freedom of Information request with local authorities in 2019, 88 local authorities, the highest proportion, said they did not send any children to live with family members abroad. 47 local authorities confirmed that they did send children to live with family members abroad in the period 2015 to 2017 inclusive, with an approximate total of 128 children reunited with family in that 3-year period, so 2015 to 2016, 2017. Now, these figures are not reliable. but that's about 43 children a year, or 0.00004% of the total looked after children in the UK for that period. And there's, to put it into context, there's 96,000 looked after children in the whole of the UK, according to NSPCC. Again, here we had 59 local authorities which said they did not hold that information, and 20 which refused to respond. So finger in the air, but yeah.
The key question in all of this, Carolyn, is the astonishing lack of information. We know that we have a significant number of children in this country born with a parent who was born overseas and may or may not live overseas. We know that we're one of the most international countries in terms of family structure, and yet our systems are not really geared up to responding to that. Anyway, let's go on to the next question.
Yep, final two questions. So, how many countries have established a central authority to deal with cases of international child protection and parental responsibility, excluding cases of child abduction? So the lawyers will probably figure out what I'm getting at here. How many countries have a central authority to deal with cases of international child protection and parental responsibility? Yeah, let's hear the answers.
The 50% are saying 52.
Nice. Well, very clever. Yes, 52. That's from the Hague Convention, 1996. And for those of you who are thinking of the Hague Convention 1980, there are 101 contracting member states. So that's just over a third of the countries in the world, which is actually quite a feat to get a third of the countries in the world to agree to something and to dedicate resource to it. But it is, also quite low. You can consider 2/3 of the world don't have a cooperation agreement. And then final question. What do you think the challenges are in exploring family abroad, whether kinship family or adoptive parents? Let's go ahead and have the answers.
Well, language issues, hardly any there. Inability to keep track of placements is 28%. Lack of understanding of process is by far the biggest, and almost half. I don't know if people can vote for more than one. UK families in an unsafe foreign country is a small number, and UK is always best choice for a child is very few people put that down. Too expensive, very few, but 49%, half are saying that there's the understanding of process is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And thank you to everyone for responding to those questions. I hope that woke us up a little bit and help put things in context. And really, Satwinder and I wanted to have a bit of a discussion about that. I think those were some really interesting answers, don't you think, Satwinder?
Yes, good morning, Caroline. I completely agree with you. I was wondering whether that last question might actually resonate with a lot of people who are with us today, because as you were talking through those, some of which were pretty incredible statistics, I was surprised by some of them, I have to say, and I got a few incorrect, I'll admit. I was concerned though that the most unreliable one may have been that as few as 43 children were placed permanently with carers overseas. I'm just saying that because our advice line at IAC that advises on outbound cases had over 200 inquiries in the last year alone. And at the moment, we're only working with a very small number of English local authorities. So I don't know whether you would think that the challenges that you listed are what CFAB's experience is to date.
Thanks, thanks, Satwinder. Yeah, I agree, and I think David's highlighted this is a key issue as well, which is that we don't really track nor report on whether children are sent overseas from care to live with families. And in terms of the challenges mentioned, when we've run focus groups with social workers in the past, many have said that they have fears that the safeguarding standards in the receiving country aren't good enough, concerned that they won't be kept informed if a placement breaks down. And I noticed, I think that was the sort of second one that came up alongside understanding of the process. And then there were challenges around obtaining sufficient information about the carer to facilitate the placement. I've often said at CFAB that if we're working with 120 countries a year, we're actually working with about 300 versions of what kinship care actually is. Because even if you take, for example, the UK, we're actually 4 different nations with, you know, very different approaches to kinship care. And then you start looking at what a viability assessment, for example, really is, and you realize there are actually around 200 different local authority versions of what information is required. And that is, you know, a country that we in the UK probably consider relatively advanced in terms of systems to support children and support kinship care placements. I think it helps explain why social workers feel the need to, they feel like they need specialized knowledge of international kinship care. It isn't just about passing requests for information back and forth between countries. There's a degree of brokering which needs to happen. If a special guardianship assessment doesn't exist in a receiving country, which is very often the case, what is the closest equivalent? How can we make this system work, even if the systems are not on parity all around the world?
Wow.
We have a question to both of you in a sense, but it's particularly to Carolyn. Are we a CFAB, is it a campaigning organisation? Are we interested in campaigning for things, or do we just provide advice and services, and what's our role? And Satwinder, I'm sorry I didn't welcome you properly and introduce you at the beginning, but you're a social worker who's working in Inter-Country Adoption Centre, so very immersed in handling some of these issues. And of course the laws about adoption are very different in different countries, and even whether the concept is actually recognised formally is a challenge in some countries. So there are some real challenges there. But Carolyn, do you want to comment on CFAB? And then
Sure. So I would say, you know, first and foremost, we are an organization that tries to support social workers and local authorities when dealing with cases, particularly involving children taken into care who potentially have family members abroad. You know, that's our bread and butter. That's what we're focused on. I wouldn't say that we are a campaigning organization, or that we are particularly looking at issues of advocacy. However, when we see that there are real gaps in the system, such as the fact that children are being sent abroad and not being tracked, and we don't have any idea what the scale is, you know, that there's not a lot of reporting as to what happens to these children, how safe those placements are, if they're thriving in those placements, you know, not a lot to inform the development of systems and better support social workers who are actually doing the casework, then we will try to get up on a platform and speak a little bit more to that point. So I hope
thank you.
A bit.
Satwinder?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Carolyn just said. I think providing inter-country adoption services has been the specialism of IAC historically, and we've provided additional services over the years, including our outbound permanent advice service since 2017. But I think when there are gaps in practice or policy, we are speaking for a small group of very vulnerable children. So I think organisations like CFAB and IAC have to step forward into that space when it's appropriate, and also support each other when we have shared interests and common goals, particularly when it comes to the welfare of children.
There was a question, I'm sorry, I'm possibly interrupting your dialogue, but it's a question to you, Satwinder, from Salma Leg, who says, would you like to comment on situation in countries that operate a kafala Islamic approach rather than adoption?
I think each country has to operate within the guidelines and practice that it feels is right for its own state. And we work with countries who are Islamic in heritage and law, but they do operate and recognise adoption services. However, we are currently working with Morocco, which is probably a really good example. Morocco recently changed their legislation to stop allowing inter-country adoption, and therefore are now only placing children on kafala arrangements, which they're absolutely entitled to do. The issue we have as the receiving state, of course, is that whilst we're signatories to the Hague Convention that recognises kafala as a parenting and guardianship order, the order isn't legally recognised as an immigration order. So it's quite complicated for prospective parents or guardians to bring children back into the UK under those arrangements. And of course, if a child isn't the legal responsibility of a guardian or a parent as they enter the country, that leaves them very vulnerable, because who then does take responsibility? The answer is, at the moment, it's the local authority where the family live that would be responsible for the child legally. But of course, we all know that we want parents to be responsible legally for all aspects of their child's welfare. So it's far from ideal, unfortunately, but it's a really good example of where two countries don't always mesh in terms of their understanding around what's going to work as a mirror order internationally.
I'll just add in there, sorry David, I'll just add in very quickly that we're going to have Mia Dambach on later today from the International Reference Centre of International Social Service, talking about kafala in particular, so that might be helpful.
I'm just struck, we're seeing all around the world a sort of reaction against globalisation, against internationalisation in so many countries, including, of course, you could argue in the UK, the Brexit vote. I think it's probably the case that most people in the UK now do not want to leave the EU, but it's too late and it's going to happen anyway. But we see that in all sorts of other countries, and yet families live their lives internationally more and more for all sorts of reasons. So challenging governments and systems to recognise the reality of the personal, emotional life of families in this international context is really incredibly challenging.
Just
Caroline?
picking up on that point, you know, something that Satwinder and I often talk about. Obviously, CFAB's, you know, predominantly focusing on international kinship care and the various forms that takes. Satwinder's got, you know, international adoption and outbound permanence, so looking at other ways to place children with families overseas. And you know, it might be helpful for Satwinder actually if you could talk a little bit about the countries that specifically require adoption for children, for them to join family members abroad, and why that might be the case.
Of course, yeah. So some good examples are the USA, South Africa, New Zealand and Canada. So these are all countries who will only allow children to enter in kinship arrangements under an adoption order. And I think our experience at IAC will tell us that the reasons for that are intrinsically political. But fundamentally, I think that these are governments that believe that adoption is the most secure route for children to move internationally, even in family circumstances. And I think that there's also a recognised process around adoption, which I suppose has a longer standing and historical context in social work assessments than our more recent moves towards kinship assessments. And historically, adoption therefore has been regulated differently, it's been recognised differently, and whilst it adds extra layers of complexity to immigration and family law, it does guarantee some safeguards that can't always be enacted in other circumstances. So as we were talking about signatories to the Hague Convention, I understand that at the moment there's 101 countries signed up for the Hague Convention on intercountry adoption. So again, that gives us some mechanisms of working to ensure that children are kept safe. And I guess that should be the primary driver for countries like these.
That's right, and I know that you've been really helpful in contributing to the International Kinship Care Guide that was circulated to attendees on Friday, and we really tried to look at you know, how we can make some of the viability and kinship care assessments more robust and what is required from various countries around the world, but also, you know, what influence does adoption have and where might that be appropriate. And I know there's an ongoing debate in this country as to how we in some ways bring the requirements and the assessment requirements for special guardianship orders and adoption a little bit more close, so that the assessments can be more robust and get the information that will allow for more stable and permanent placement for children.
We're coming to the end of our session, but there's an interesting question around the assessment of kinship carers. Jennifer is saying in some places it seems as if The only way a kinship placement can be approved is if the person is prepared to come to the UK for several months to test the placement. I'm not sure that is consistent everywhere, but some of the issues about breakdown in overseas countries or elsewhere. Carolyn, do you have any thoughts?
I think I would just say that, you know, there is no comprehensive guidance, official comprehensive guidance at the moment as to what the process should be for exploring kinship carers abroad. In the guide that was circulated and that will now be up on our website, we talk about the advantages and disadvantages of different approaches. So one approach might be, for example, as was mentioned, bringing a kinship carer to the UK, being able to observe how they interact with the child, being able to do an assessment, etc. That of course leaves out the part of looking at where the child's home is going to be, what that home environment looks like, what is the support systems that exist around that family, that neighborhood, that school, the health systems, etc. We always advocate working with partners that are local to the country where the child will be going, because they will be able to understand best what that situation looks like for the child, or what it will look like for the child. And as Sir Andrew mentioned earlier, this is really important. We need to not only understand what are our requirements in the UK, but actually what's happening in the country that we're potentially exploring, and how might we support that child and family to thrive in their destination and environment. So you can have the social worker come to the UK. You can, some people do fly UK social workers overseas. It's not a practice that CFAB recommends. It's illegal in many countries. It can create a lot of problems culturally, for the family where the social worker is visiting, etc. You can use remote technology to try and bridge some of those gaps. So rather than sending a social worker overseas and rather than bringing them here, you can use remote technology. There are limitations to that as well. There's so much to think about in these international cases, and we really do hope that, at the very least, the International Kinship Care Guide begins to give everyone a better understanding of all of the different factors that need to be taken into account and where to find out more information if they need help.
And if we focus on the child's emotional needs and the development of the child, the young person, and where their future life and their sense of identity, then we have to approach that in a way that is flexible and responds to their needs and, of course, the rights of the family. And the balance of those rights in different countries is held differently as well, of course, in the perception of who has the stronger rights. But all of that is very difficult in legal systems and administrative systems that are based on procedures and rules and so on. So all of us all the time have to be working to see how we can do the right thing for the child and the family, and that is not easy in a world where borders are getting stronger and countries are getting more assertive. But anyway, thank you to Carolyn and Satwinder. I think my timetable is I'm to moving on now, but Carolyn, have we covered your issues?
Yes, thanks so much, David.
Thank you. And Satwinder, it's good to meet you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be keeping in touch. But we're moving on now to another element. So I'm introducing Alison and Roz. So they need to be brought forward onto the screen. Alison Shalaby is from Chief Executive of Reunite, and has got personal experience as well as other organisational experience in raising awareness about child abduction and the problems of working in those situations. See, Alison is coming forward now, so welcome to you. And Roz Osborne is the Chief Executive of Global Arc, which is about families, helping families who are stuck in an overseas country and not able to reunite as a result of family breakdown and sometimes domestic abuse and all sorts of other complexities. So great, you're both there, Alison and Roz. Welcome to you both, and thank you very much for joining us. And I think it's over to you, and I'm not sure which of you is starting or if you're having a conversation. So over to you.
I think I'm going to start. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Roz.
So I'm the founder and director of a charity called Global Arc. Our mission is to prevent international custody disputes and reduce their devastating impact on children and parents who are stuck in a foreign country. The definition of a stuck parent is a parent who has moved abroad and after a relationship breakdown cannot legally return to their home country with their children. This actually affects thousands of migrant families every year. They are simply not aware that if they move abroad, their child will become classed as habitually resident in the foreign country. And if one parent returns home with their child without the permission of the other parent, they can be charged with international parental child abduction under the Hague Convention 1980. And you may be disappointed, but much more likely relieved to hear that I'm not going to be speaking about the technical ins and outs of international law. But what I do have to offer is almost a decade of practical experience supporting families who have been affected by the Hague Convention. So I'm going to be talking about the all-important procedure that lies behind the law and how it is working in practice for young people. Could I have the next slide, please, Michael? I wonder if there's the next slide. Fantastic. So meet Tom. He's the fictional character in our new animation aimed at helping young people through a Hague Convention case. So of course there are a diverse range of young people facing the situation, some British, some not, but they share similar challenges. So here, Tom's family is British, but they emigrated to Australia. Then they split up and his mum brought him back to England. Tom is likely to be a vulnerable child, but to understand why, it is important to look at the reason why Tom's mum might have left Australia. To add some context, over 3/4 of Hague Convention cases involve a primary carer mother taking the child, often going back to her home country. Domestic abuse is raised as a defence in nearly every case. So our survey of 450 parents reveals that over 90% of stuck parents are victims of domestic abuse. The survey also tells us that there are typically other factors in the mother's decision to take her child. These can include poverty, visa issues, and mental health. Therefore, it is highly likely that Tom has already had a very tough start in life. Next slide, please. So next, Tom's mum receives a letter telling her to appear before the High Court in London, as it is alleged she has unlawfully abducted Tom. Next slide, please. Tom will be asked to go to London and be interviewed by the High Court CAFCAS team. The role that they have been given is much more restrictive than regional CAFCAS teams. In Hague Convention cases, the CAFCAS officer's job is to interview the child for around an hour to report on their wishes and feelings, level of maturity, and whether or not they object to returning to the other country. CAFCAS are currently the only agency in touch with abducted young people. In specific cases, the court can also allow young people to speak to the judge directly or have their own legal representation. This can be helpful for a teenager. A lawyer can guide them through the court process, respond to evidence, and represent the teenager's views. In cases of child abuse, this could be vitally important. However, it is rare for the court to allow young people to have their own representation, and sadly, they are not usually made aware of this option. We would question whether this provision satisfies Article 12 of the UN Rights of the Child, to allow the child to express their views freely and give due weight to them. Next slide, please.
Ros, just to say, CAFCAS for people abroad who are not UK social workers, we have some overseas people. That is the social work agency that is linked with the courts.
Thank you. So as you will know, family court decisions are based on the best interests of the child. Hague Convention proceedings, however, work on a different principle. The welfare evaluation is presumed to take place in the country of the child's habitual residence after they return. Unfortunately, in practice, this is not always a safe assumption. In cases where, for example, the taking mother does not return with the child will usually go to live with the other parent, and unless someone makes an application to the court, there may be no subsequent court welfare decision. The Hague Permanent Bureau recently published a guide to good practice on Article 13b, which advises that when the taking parent is unable to return with the child, to address a grave risk, it is important that pending custody proceedings in the state of habitual residence are listed promptly. It is clear to us that unless courts do set up these proceedings, children will be put at risk, and we would argue that failing to do so would go against Article 3 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Children's Act 1989, which states that children's welfare should be the paramount concern of the courts. So currently, if Tom's mum is unable to return with Tom to Australia, he would usually return on his own to live with his dad, and there may never be a welfare decision at all. However, if Tom's mum does return to Australia with him, there might be other risks. Often the High Court judge deems it necessary to make orders of protection for the child and mother as they are returned to alleviate a grave risk. However, unless these orders or undertakings have been made into mirrored orders, they are not usually legally enforceable in other countries, and this can put vulnerable families at further risk. Next slide, please. The end result is that Tom has potentially been left in a very vulnerable position. He's been stuck in the middle of domestic abuse, undergone an international move, had minimal agency support in England, been court ordered to return possibly without enforceable orders of protection, or to a potentially abusive parent, and no welfare decision. There are no follow-ups under The Hague, and our worry is that children are falling through the gaps in the system. This scenario throws up such concerning issues, but we felt we had to do something to help these vulnerable children and young people. Next slide, please.
You have one minute, Ros.
I'm nearly done. So this month we launched a new section of the Global Arc website just for young people who are going through a Hague Convention case in England and Wales. So for the first time, there is a place online where young people can go to find out information and links to support services. It is a small step, but we hope that this will begin to empower young people and essentially keep them safer. Next slide, please. There is much work still to be done, and we need people to get involved. We have a page for professionals where there is a survey on the needs of young people. Please do sign up to receive updates or email me at youngpeople@globalarc.org. I would love to hear your feedback on the problems young people face in this situation and hear what you think needs to happen to improve the lives of young people in this challenging situation. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Ros, for that, and it's really challenging to get so much packed into such a short time. But going straight on to Alison, who is from Reunite, and Alison, over to you for your presentation. Thank you very much, and then we've got some question and answers later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, Alison, could I just say to colleagues who are putting information in chat, obviously chat is available, so if we could be respectful in our language, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much. And Alison, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that my slides will come up very shortly. So our full title is Reunite International Child Abduction Centre. And we are an organisation with an advice line that speaks with both sides involved in these cases. So we speak with abducting parents, we also speak with left behind parents, and occasionally we do speak with children and meet children as well. Could I have the next slide, please? So parental child abduction, it's not about parental rights, it's about the rights of a child to have a meaningful relationship with both parents and the right for that child to be protected from the harm of child abduction. This is Hannah, who is in her early 20s, and this is how she reflects on her experience of being abducted by a mother at the age of 8. Could we have the next slide, please? This is Lucy, who was retained by her father, and a lot of children do come home, but by the time they do return home, then they've already sustained some sort of damage. Can we have the next slide, please? I don't want to focus too much on the slides because I know we've got limited time, and I really want to focus on what you as social workers can do to assist in these cases of parental child abduction. So there's a myriad of reasons why parents abduct. The main one that we see is that there is a breakdown of a relationship, and one parent wants to leave the country, taking the children with them, and then the other parent is opposed to that. Could we have the next slide, please? So we took a quick snapshot just to put everything into context, and in the last 3 calendar months, our advice line has recorded 173 new abduction cases, the majority of those going out of the UK. Could we have the next slide, please? And this is really where I want to pause from the slides and just sort of talk about what a social worker can do to assist in these cases. I think if there was one message that I could pass to social workers, it is obviously you have to focus on the immediate harm to children and protect those children, but also I would urge you to think about future potential risks. So recently we had a father contact us. He was concerned his children were going to be abducted to Kenya, and it was the social worker that had Googled, because she shared those concerns, and she Googled, found our advice line number, father had come through, he could safeguard his children. Again, similarly, recently we had a social worker contact the advice line, and she had a mother with her at that time because the mother wanted to relocate, go back to the States, and the social worker knew that there were processes that need to be followed. They are 2 positive areas, positive actions that a social worker can take. Unfortunately, not all of our interactions with social workers have been positive. We had a mother contact the advice line only last week. She was calling from Germany. Social services had been involved in her case with her family, and it was the social worker who'd said to her that, as you're from Germany, the best thing that you can do is just take your child back to Germany. The mother was absolutely distraught because she didn't realise that by following the advice of the social worker, she'd actually committed a criminal offence. So she was facing criminal charges. She was also facing proceedings under the Hague Convention. I think the other areas where I would really urge social workers to think ahead is where there's care proceedings. We've had several cases recently where a social worker has contacted the advice line. There was one in particular, the local authority had acquired parental responsibility for children, and one of the parents had links to Pakistan. So they acquired the PR, but they hadn't thought ahead. They hadn't taken protective measures to prevent an abduction. And when they went to collect the children, to remove the children, the parent had already fled, left the Pakistan with the children. We've seen similar this year with cases involving Syria, Iran, Iraq. Those children are not going to return home. So that's why I'm saying, please look at future risks, not just look at immediate risks. May we have the next slide, please? So again, cases into the UK, we're seeing fewer, and again, similar story. Majority of cases are mothers. May we have the next slide, please? So when a child is suddenly abducted, everything changes for them. The main thing is the relationship changes, where contact with the other parent is reduced or completely severed. They also have changes, obviously, to the physical environment, and it's these 2 things that have the huge impact on children. May I have the next slide, please? So Professor Marilyn Freeman did some research with children or adults who were abducted as children. And as this slide shows, it can have a huge impact on the children. Next slide, please. Again, more research findings from speaking with adults abducted as children. And what we can see is the biggest impact is around mental health issues. So being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, a lot of children have anxiety. A lot of the children that we've met, they actually self-harm to control the pain, is how they describe it to us. Could we have the next slide? If parents want to move overseas with children, there is a legal process, and that is what we urge all parents to go down. Rather than abduct, the legal process is there to request permission to relocate with the children. May we have the next slide, please? And again, important things for social workers to consider. And I'm going to leave that slide with you. I know you're getting copies of everything, but I know we are restricted on time. So thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. And I would urge you to consider future risks as well as immediate risks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Carolyn tells me that the recording is going to be available. If you, those who are participants, sign up for the CFAB newsletter, then you'll be notified when the recording is available. And slides are going to be circulated after the conference to participants. So that information will be available for you. Thank you, Ros and Alison, for sticking to time. There's so much emotion and so much reality in this, this subject. There was a question that perhaps we can pick up on. We've got 2 or 3 minutes for questions about passports, and is there an issue about passports and when passports can be issued? Presumably that's different in every country, but Alison and then Ros?
It will be different in every country. It'll also depend which country you're living in and the nationality of your child as to whether you have to go through embassies, consulates. So I'm not sure what was the issue regarding passports.
I think it's whether both parents, who can request a passport and how can that be issued? Can something be done without the other parent knowing?
Yeah, a lot of countries, they just require one parent to sign the forms, but you can get caveats, well, certainly in the UK you can. You can contact the passport office if you are concerned about the other parent getting a passport without your knowledge, and you can get a caveat placed around your child so that a passport cannot be issued without your consent.
So that's a procedure in the UK?
Yeah, I think also for social workers, it's very important when you think there is a risk that you can actually get a passport order to get passports removed from parents and the children's passports. And we need to remember that a lot of the children involved in these cases are dual nationals. So it's not just British passports, it's also passports of the other nationality. Yes.
I'm coming to you, Ros. Any comments on that?
Not really. I think Alison's covered that one.
There was somebody from Sylvia was asking around that issue and was okay. I think we've covered it as much as we can. Mental health issues. This is really very complicated. There's a question, the mental health impact on a young person being abducted as against staying in an abusive relationship. And we're all the time weighing up these different elements. I guess the main issue in a way to social workers and indeed to lawyers is to say, if you become aware of these issues, get advice on things, because you gave an example of a case where some advice was given and then inadvertently the law is broken. This is an incredibly complicated area of law, a lot of case law, a lot of issues. So you really do need technical advice, and don't just go on what you think might be the right thing, because you can end up in real trouble. I'll come to Ros first and then Alison, and for some final comments.
Yeah, I think everyone would probably agree that children in this situation are faced with multiple issues. They're likely to have experienced domestic abuse, they've moved countries, they've had to move schools, they've been separated from one of their parents potentially, and then they're going through a very stressful court case, their parents are stressed, and they receive very little help. So that was my main point really, is that these children receive very little support and very little help at the moment. And we would like to see there be more support from multiple agencies really. It doesn't need to be CAFCAS, it could be social services or it could be charities. But they're pretty much on their own at the moment, and they don't have any information or support available to them, which is very, very sad.
And the core principle that the voice of the child and the experience of the child needs to be heard in these contexts. Alison, some final reflections from you?
Yeah, I think children are really impacted when they are abducted, and it's that loss of control, it's the loss of everything that's familiar to them. Prevention is far better than cure. And I think, going back to what you were saying, David, I think there is this interplay between domestic abuse, child abduction, but the answer is to remove the child, to get the child protection from the immediate danger, but then also prevent that future risk in the form of abduction.
Thank you. I know there are other questions have come through, and I think for time, I'm afraid we're just going to have to stop there. But of course there are more questions, and the basic message has to be that there are a significant number, not a huge number, but a significant number of international cases. And the advice to people involved must be to get specialist advice about the movement. Movement to every country is slightly different. The legal risks are different. The needs of the different parties will be varied. And there are agencies around, some of them you've seen in this webinar, who are able to give advice and have got helplines. And so don't think you have to go it alone. Get advice so that you avoid getting into complications later. But Alison and Ros, thank you for being disciplined in your presentations in such a complex area, and for joining us and for answering questions. My timetable says that we now have a comfort break just for 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll come back to hear from Global Social Services, Workforce Alliance and International Social Services, setting some of the issues we've been discussing in a wider international context. It's really great. We've still got around 250 people on the call, so thank you for sticking with it. We're on to the final lap now, so short break, and see you back in 4 or 5 minutes. Thank you. I think we're coming back together shortly. And now we have Hugh and Mia joining us.
Hello. Hi there.
Hello, Hugh, and hello, Mia. Nice to see you again. Right, I'm just thinking we're good to go. So welcome back, everybody. Very short comfort break. This is a frantic morning of so much information, but we've got some more good presentations still to come. And first of all, welcoming Hugh, who is a social worker, works for the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance, based now, are you in Azerbaijan?
No, in Kyrgyzstan, in Central Asia.
Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
getting the stans mixed up there. Sorry.
No worries.
Anyway, it's good to welcome you, and you're obviously involved in social service workforce issues, and I know Caroline is involved very much there, and Mia as well from International Social Service based in Geneva, working on a whole range of policy issues. But moving on to something new, Mia, sometime soon, I gather. So that's congratulations to you for that, although you'll be a big loss. So I think, Hugh, you're going first, and then Mia. So welcome to you. Over to you, Hugh.
Thank you. Great. Well, I've got a few slides. Michael, can you show the first one?
The slides seem to sometimes be a bit slow coming, so if you just keep talking, and you can be confident they catch up with you, I think. So.
Okay, so next slide, that one's just my introductory slide. The first few are very, very brief. Just as the first one to explain who we are, we work towards a world where there's a well-planned, well-trained and well-supported social service workforce, which improves the lives of the most vulnerable populations. And in doing so, you can see in the 4 yellow boxes there, the things that we do, and it's in the mission there to promote knowledge, generation of knowledge. Of course, we convene a wider network, as wide as possible. We also build capacity of the social service workforce and of the people that promote and manage the social service workforce. And we also promote effective advocacy through our nearly 3,000 members and a group of ambassadors that we have as well. Just to say that when we build capacity, we need to recognize that the social workers and social service workforce come in many forms with many different levels of training. So we're trying to promote multi-level certified training so that people can access that training at different levels. Sometimes they're already experienced, sometimes they have no experience, sometimes they train whilst they're in mid-career or at the beginning of their career. But the idea is to give them a ladder of opportunity so they can progress professionally into a professional social work role or whatever is appropriate in their particular context. Next slide, please. So this umbrella picture just really shows you that we have a very broad concept of the social service workforce, which is why we exist separately from, but very much complementing the work of the International Federation of Social Workers, of which, of course, David was president and is still very involved with. And we also complement the work of International Social Services, which Mia is representing here today, and which, of course, CFAB is a member. So our particular take on this is that we focus on the wider social service workforce, and that includes those who are qualified or not qualified, professionals, paraprofessionals, social work assistants or other forms of carers, youth workers, community workers, etc., and of course residential workers. So, you know, we have a very broad concept, and if anything, our members are mainly social service workforce strengtheners themselves. So we strengthen people who are strengthening the workforce, just to clarify that, more than specifically a network of practitioners, although many of practitioners are our members too. Okay, next slide. So this is just to briefly summarize some of the risks that we're aware of during the pandemic and during 2020 in particular. I mean, some of this is quite well documented, but we did a survey in April, and these were some of the first findings that we came up with. It's very well known that there's been increased violence against children and against their mothers, and in the form of domestic violence or gender-based violence, intimate partner violence. Many other vulnerable groups have been at heightened risk, and they also have often lacked information or support. Some services still require in-person support, so there's been a challenge to the workforce to how to provide that. A lot of support has been provided remotely, but not all can be provided remotely, and so there's been a risk to the worker as well as the children and families of continuing to do visits. There's been a massively increased workload for many social service workforce, and their roles have often widened, and they do many more things than they used to, and they've had a backlog of referrals. So not just so we have a backlog in the courts, we have a backlog in almost all social work departments or social services. And in the time that they've been doing this, workers have had to adapt rapidly to learn to use new technology and adapt their services to social distance requirements. As an example, how do you maintain confidentiality using a video call? Do you know that it's confidential like it used to be when you would meet someone in your office or in your interview room? If you're meeting them outdoors because you have to for social distance requirements, is it being overheard? If you're meeting them in a public space and you're keeping 2 meters distance, more people might be hearing your conversation. So all sorts of issues around social distancing for the workforce. And then of course the impact of COVID itself in terms of not just the medical impact, but the impact on the community, on the fear of the virus, the stigma from association with the virus, that's all impacted the workforce. And then there's numerous other stressors and stress factors affecting the workforce while trying to continue with their work. Their own personal circumstances, their childcare responsibilities with schools closed, and a number of other complicating factors for the staff. Okay, next slide. But of course, it's been a time of opportunity and adaptation too, as others have mentioned. So one great advocacy gain for us, and we've been part of this with many other partners, is actually a recognition, not immediately, but belatedly, there was a recognition that the social service workforce is actually essential. Initially, medical workers and health workers were recognized first as essential, and they were given PPE. But over time, social service workers, starting actually in China and then other places, were given that PPE to enable them to do visits and to have meetings safely. And that recognition is a very important advocacy gain for the workforce, and we hope we can build on that going forward. Use of technology, of course, has been very innovative. There have been helplines set up, video calls are now widely used. Parenting programs that used to be face-to-face are now conducted online. Many different information systems online for case management, including using mobile phones and tablets. And then many social workers have informally formed WhatsApp groups, either just with their team or with peers across borders. So there's lots of innovation there. And in-person support has had to be adapted too, as I was mentioning before. And generally there's an awareness of heightened risks. For example, if you're calling up someone who might be a victim of domestic violence, do you know if the perpetrator is overhearing the call? There's all sorts of issues that social workers are having to think through right now. But at the same time, there is a wider range of learning opportunities. So when we talk about that multi-level, in the past, it might have been very difficult for somebody in a distant village in Thailand or Cambodia or Kenya to access social work training. And now increasingly they are accessing at least some kind of introductory or mid-service course online, and that is an improvement. But of course, we want to ensure quality, and that's why we go for certification wherever possible. And also, I think we can mention that supervision has generally carried on. We have developed guidance on professional supervision this year, and we're advocating for continuation of supervision for all caseworkers and social service workforce. Often it has shifted immediately to online or by telephone, and so that's been a good adaptation as well. And also there's been a need for better integration with other services, and that's mostly been achieved, examples being schools and clinics and also justice services. That's basically my last slide, but just one more, just to show some links for you to follow up, including the guidance on supervision and some other links, including a note that we put out on how to protect the workforce during COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Hugh, for covering all of that area. And interesting, refer to the MOOCs, which I expect Mia will touch on as a way of developing training. I'm really strongly saying that whilst the pandemic is a medical emergency in its first phase, it is actually more significantly a social crisis. And the social services workforce, however that's defined in different countries, is carrying a huge burden, as Hugh was describing. And it's sad that the social service workforce was not recognised so strongly, but that is increasingly happening. And we need to keep asserting that. So Mia, over to you for your perspectives on some of these international dimensions. Thanks, Hugh.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everybody. I was asked to talk about the perspectives of different countries in terms of the child protection issues that we are all facing. And we know that each country deals with child protection differently, even just as Hugh mentioned, in terms of the social service workforce. Some countries like Cambodia have less than 20 social workers officially working for Melissa. The benefit of COVID has also ensured that we can access, they can access training better, as David mentioned, the MOOC, the Massive Open Online Course. One of them for children on the MOOC has reached 30,000 participants. One on adapting child protection case management has reached 8,000 participants, and it's available in 4 languages. So there are advantages there. But of course, what you want is also specific training on at a different country level. And that we've been able to do with Vietnam and Ukraine. We've had to adapt the in-country to remote training. And there we've been able to do some training with all the different actors. But in terms of the different issues that social workers will be facing, I've identified 3 areas that would be highly affected by cross-border issues. And one is what Marilyn was talking about before, is international surrogacy arrangements. We can see there that countries have very different approaches. There's the altruistic approach, like you have in the UK, like Australia, South Africa, but then we have commercial type arrangements, as we see in Ukraine, Georgia, Russia, and in some states of America. Then, of course, in surrogacy, you have countries that have legal parentage at birth. Who is the legal parent? In most of Asia, it is the surrogate mother, and in some cases, her husband. And in other countries, we have the intending parents, for example, in Georgia, Ukraine, and in some states in America. Then, of course, COVID-19, that also has affected the way we approach surrogacy. We can see that with the number of stranded babies that we saw in countries such as Ukraine. And here I think what's important for social workers, but also for lawyers to remember, is that whilst legal parentage is very, very important, it shouldn't be the only right that trumps all other rights. I think it's important that, and this is what because UNICEF and gave me the opportunity to speak to the Ministry of Justice and to Social Affairs and to the Ministry of Interior in Ukraine. And for me, it was really important to explain to them, yes, legal parentage is very, very important, but make sure that you also can ensure that these children have access to their origins, that sale of children hasn't occurred, and that their other rights have not been breached, that there have been safeguards that have been respected. Then if we move on to adoption, we can also see that different countries have different perspectives as well. We can see that some countries only have simple adoption, for example, in the Pacific Islands and in some countries in Africa. And then when we're talking about inter-country adoption, then most countries have ratified the 93 Hague Convention, and there you would need full adoption. Then different countries have approaches in terms of whether should it be an open adoption, should it be a closed adoption. In many, many countries in Eastern Europe and in Latin America, it's still very much a closed adoption process. If you even look at the laws in Belarus and Ukraine, they allow you to change the date of birth of the child within 6 months, as well as the place of birth of the child, and that's legally allowed. And for me, that is quite a bit of a challenge and something that needs to be changed in terms of the child's access to his or her origins. The way that countries approached COVID in terms of inter-country adoption is also very different. You saw China, they basically had a moratorium on all inter-country adoptions, and they stopped processing adoptions, whereas the Philippines were able to have a special visa. Then you had Guatemala and Colombia that actually had developed the manuals, like 30-page manuals on how to deal with COVID and inter-country adoption. So you can really see that depending on the country, their approaches to different child protection issues varies quite a lot. Then we mentioned, I heard one of the other speakers talk about kafala. When we talk about kafala, even the term itself is very different. You have Egypt, for them it's sponsorship of children in residential care. In Syria, they're looking at developing a law for refugees and also migrant children. But in Morocco, it's only for children really that are abandoned, although it can be used for other children. And then in Tunisia, you have a dual legal system which allows for adoption and also kafala. And then in cross-border cases, if you look at the receiving countries, you have countries like the US and Belgium that allow for the automatic conversion into adoption, whereas other countries like France and Germany need a bit more time. After 3 to 5 years, then you may be able to convert it into a national adoption. So thankfully, we have the Hague Conference on Private International Law, and Philip will, I'm sure, talk about that in the session after me, where they can give some guidance when there's conflict of law. And we need public law, of course, to make sure that we always keep the child's rights at the forefront of any decisions that we're making. Thank you.
Mia, thank you so much for touching on just a few countries and the huge differences that do exist in some of the administrative and legal, as well as the cultural perceptions of what parenting and childhood is all about, which again, just to stress the point, makes it so important that if you're a practitioner and you come across a case with an international dimension, it really is strongly advisable to get some professional support and assistance, some advice, so that you don't inadvertently make mistakes. Well, we're coming now to our final presenter, and then we're going to have just a short time for question and answer. So I hope that Philippe is there, the first secretary in the Hague Permanent Bureau, which is the global body that has an oversight of the conventions which relate to children and families in these circumstances. Philippe originally came from Canada, but is very involved with a number of these structures and arrangements. So I'm hoping that I see Philippe is there and is about to appear. Bienvenue, Philippe. Je pense que vous parlez français. Bienvenue à notre conférence.
Thank you very much, David. Very nice of you. Kind words. I'll speak in English. It's okay.
That's good because we don't have translation, and I wouldn't like to do it myself.
No, absolutely not. I'll spare you this on a Monday morning. I have some slides for this presentation, if Michael can put them up. I was asked to talk about the Hague conventions, the Hague work, strategic directions, and the role of the conventions in the UK, more specifically as post-Brexit. So I may apologize in advance. I will not talk about international surrogacy. That was not the intention, but I can only repeat what Mia Dumba has just said very kindly. And I will respond to the earlier question. When are we likely to have regulations or laws at the international level in that area? Look, if I had a crystal ball, I would be delighted to give you an answer, but I don't. I can only repeat what other speakers have said. It's a very, very complex area, delicate, and we're working at it. And we had just a 7th meeting of this experts group in the area. So Brexit, yes, well, Brexit is about dealing with changes, isn't it? We go through happy changes in life, start a new job, marry, buying a house, birth of a child. And sometimes we go through more difficult changes, like losing a job, losing property, having critical health issues. And COVID has, you know, give us a good examples of that in the recent month. Death of a friend, parent, partner, child. Some changes, like divorce, sometimes can be very difficult because you have very tough and hard divorce. Sometimes, well, where both partners are in agreement with the way forward, you can have an happy divorce. And I would think that Brexit also falls into that category. Some people are happy about Brexit because this is what they wanted. Others are not because this is what they didn't want and they had voted against. So if we can go to the next slide, some of you are aware of this, social workers and experts in family law. This is one of the tools to deal with changes. It's a diagram of the 5 stages of grief and loss by Kubler-Ross, the grief cycle. And you see it's very linear. It's you know, there's progression in feelings. But that's the theory. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that actually, and some of us experience this through Brexit and other changes in life, that you can be at any point in your cycle of grief, and you keep bouncing back and forth, and you know, you have ups and downs and look forward to the future. Anyway, this is the sad thing about making presentations online is you don't have the reaction from the public, because I thought that I see some people laughing, smiling at my experience. But anyway, that's the way it is. This is probably the only slide some of you will remember after this. Let's move to the next slide. Leaving Brussels 2A, what does that mean? If you make a comparison with the 1980 child abduction, well, there won't be too many changes actually, because some of the provisions of Brussels 2A, like hearing the child, are actually already covered in your global international obligations under Article 12 of the UNCRC. The 6-week time frame, well, under the child abduction, it's a little softer than what Brussels 2 bis actually was providing for under Article 11. Adequate arrangements for return, which you know, specifically was provided for under Brussels 2A. We now have a guide to good practice on 13.1b, as Rose Osborne actually highlighted earlier. The one change is actually Article 11.6 to 8. Those will no longer apply, but they were rather controversial at the time. So maybe for some of you, this may be a good thing and will make the whole process a little simpler. Another good thing is that, and we'll come back to this under the 96 Convention, is that you have now some provisional basis of jurisdiction actually to take measures of protections. We'll look at this later. Well, the UK decision to actually will no longer be subject to the European Court of Justice. So this may be a good thing. It may actually speed up the process. And the UK will decide on its own right accessions to the 1980 Convention. So there's a whole lot of states. Jamaica is just one example of states that have not yet been whose accessions have not been accepted because they are actually subject to a consensus system at the European Council. So that, in my view, is a good thing. Next slide, we will talk about the 1996 Convention and the benefits of leaving Brussels 2A. Well, you have those grounds of jurisdiction, Article 11 and 12, which are a real bonus. They are grounds of jurisdiction based on the presence of the child, and they will allow for a court to take urgent measures of protections to order contact between child and left behind parent in the state habitual residence. This is something that Brussels 2A did not provide for. It also provides for the possibility to take urgent measures of protections to protect the child during return. And these measures of protections will actually be recognized and enforced in any state where the child will be stopping over on the way back to the habitual residence. So this is something that was not available under Brussels 2A. Some judges in the UK tried it. There were a few critiques about that, but definitely a bonus here. And of course, the provisional measure to order contact between child and left behind parent if that parent is in the state of refuge with the child. Applicable law rules will remain the same. There is an explicit provision for advance recognition and enforcement of decision in case of relocation, something that was not specifically provided for under Brussels 2A. And from our reading of the two instruments, it is our view at the Hague Conference that the Central Authority system under 1996 is actually more generous and more flexible because we didn't draft as much into the details, giving more flexibility to parties under the convention. The next slide will deal with a convention. It doesn't necessarily specifically talk about child protection, but it's the one component of Brussels 2A which is important, the recognition of divorce and legal separations. Well, the UK is a party to the 1970 convention. It's actually been implemented in the UK law. So any incoming divorce from abroad will be recognized according to those rules. But then divorce from the UK outside the UK to be recognized outside the UK, well, there's a limit to the number of states that can be done under the 1970 convention. About 12 states are parties. So something to look forward. The UK will have to work hard in inviting other EU member states to become party to the 1970 convention, and of course, other states abroad, outside the EU. Let's move to the next slide. The next slide deals with the maintenance regulation and the maintenance convention. Look, I think that not much would be lost. Much more will be gained because dealing with child support applications, it would be, I think, easier in the future. You'll deal with all of them under one single instrument. It will provide you with the possibility to streamline your process and procedures and should make it easier for anybody concerned in the UK to actually recover child support. We'll move to the next slide, which basically sums up the future. Well, look, I think there are great opportunities throughout all of this. The UK will participate in its own right in the work of the Hague Conference with regard to those three conventions, 1980, 96, 2007. It will decide in its own right to refuse or accept states' accessions to those three conventions. UK decisions will no longer be subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, so gaining a bit of time here. UK procedures, systems, central authority services will be streamlined again. Procedures will be harmonized for cross-border child abduction, child protection, and child support, divorce, and legal separation matters. And the UK will deepen its existing partnerships, and I can think about the Commonwealth and develop new ones. I think there's a tremendous future lined up. And I think it's also important to think about handicapped children that eventually will become adults. We think that it is time that the UK extend the application of the 2000 Protection of Adults Convention to England and Wales and Northern Ireland, as it already applies to Scotland. It is important to protect children who, by reason of an impairment or insufficiency of their personal faculties, will not be able or in a position to protect their interests once they become adults. At the end of the day, we're all children. And, you know, at 18 years old, well, we remain children, but we have our own way of going about life and making our own decisions. But it is important to protect these people who, by reason of impairment or insufficiency, cannot protect their own interest. So this is all I wanted to say. And look, I would like to once again congratulate CFAB for its 65th anniversary. It's wonderful to celebrate this, and we would like to thank again CFAB for inviting the Hague Conference today. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. I'll practice my language skills by saying Swiss French, merci vielmals, mixing French and German. But thank you very much for that contribution and for being optimistic. As somebody who believes that Brexit is a total and complete catastrophe for our country, that's my personal view. It's good to show that there are some encouraging opportunities, and there are the Commonwealth networks. I'm very involved in some of those as well, and that's a strength. And the fact that there are other ways, because as an international country, we cannot turn our backs on and close our borders. We have to continue to be involved. And if we don't, it's shocking that in the whole Brexit debate, there was nothing in the campaign before the vote about family rights and these family issues. They just did not feature in the political debate at all. And now we're seeing the consequences of it. So we have a few minutes to, but Philippe, thank you for your optimism. And we'll try and keep smiling. And I'm joined by Mia and Hugh again. And we just have a few minutes. And perhaps we'll come back for Caroline. I was looking at the central authority. There are some issues around the central authority we could pick up on. I could just perhaps mention that in the chat, there was a reference to the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office in the context of surrogacy, had facilitated some exchanges, and colleagues will have seen that in the chat. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. I'm not asking for any comment, but despite whatever the problems, there were a number of families who were stranded when in surrogacy arrangements when the pandemic struck. So let's go to some questions. Hugh, to come to you first of all, any reflections in general about the way the world is going and how families are treated in this complicated world which we're currently living in, and strong borders, but yet more mobility, paradoxically?
Wow, that's a very broad question. Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously a big issue for many families is a combination of issues with their parents' employment and the schools for the children. So I think that, you know, we're probably going to see a long tail to this pandemic. We're going to see social and economic impacts going long beyond the ending of lockdowns. And obviously many of us are still very much in lockdowns or new ones right now. So I think that the social service workforce will need to be responding long into the future to the long-term effects. And of course, there's not just the broader sort of macro social and economic impacts, effects on society and on the economy. There's the effect on children's learning and the effect on relationships, but also there's a number of cases where there has been abuse or violence, and those cases have peaked and often services were not available. So there may be greater impacts of trauma for years to come, when previously maybe there was an intervention, a timely intervention or response which was no longer available or was less available. So I think that we're going to be seeing 2021 is very much hopefully in many ways better than this year, but I think the workforce will be responding to the impact of this year for quite a few years to come.
And Philippe, one of the questions came up is, what are the structures internationally for responding to the complications or the problems? Or it was suggested if central authorities make an error, how can that be corrected or challenged? Do you have any reflections on that?
Well, that's again a very broad question, because I mean, all cases are different and they have different circumstances. But we work in a, the Hague Convention set up central authority systems, and their main task is to actually cooperate. Yes, errors may happen, but I think it is possible to actually correct errors, move forward. They don't necessarily have to go to courts. What is important is for people to communicate properly, to cooperate properly, to understand each other properly. And our objective at the Hague Conference is to actually put systems in place so that these communications and cooperation can actually reach the highest level. We have country profiles. We're developing electronic case management system to streamline procedures, to to try to, as much as possible, have people talk the same language, even though they actually are working in different languages. But this is our main objective. And, you know, we all learn. I mean, I learn every day. We do make mistakes, and we try to avoid making those mistakes in the future. I think that most of the central authorities in the system are, you know, working in a pragmatic, proactive way, and very constructive. And that's the way forward. We learn from our mistakes, and we just try to do better, you know, the next day.
Perhaps Carolyn from CFAB is going to finish in a few minutes for us. Might comment on the central authority in the UK and how that works. But Mia, International Social Service is one of only 2 organisations that has a cooperation agreement with the Hague Permanent Bureau. So we are actually connected into that system, and that gives us an opportunity to act as advocates for some of these issues, I guess.
Absolutely. I think that we've got a very privileged position because we've been given this observer status, and we have this MOU, which means that we're invited to become experts in some of the working groups. For example, the working group on illicit adoption practices, the working group on parentage and surrogacy. And so that gives us an opportunity to give a social worker or another view to the highly sensitive and political discussions that are ongoing. So yeah, I think that that's a real benefit for us as an organisation, and for children as well, to put children's rights at the centre of those discussions.
Absolutely, and CFAB, Children and Families Across Borders in the UK, is the UK member of the International Social Service Network, one of the longest serving members as well. So that's good. But perhaps finish by wishing you well in your new role, Mia, where you're going to, and thanks to all of our speakers in this final session, Hugh and Philippe and Mia. Thank you for your contributions. It's been a really tight timetable. We've rushed through in a morning a number of very significant and complex areas, and all the time remembering, as I'm coming to Carolyn now, that every case involves families and individuals with feelings and pain and distress of some kind. And we can ease that, and sometimes by our involvement, it can seem to people that it's making life more difficult, that every single case is different. And that's why it is so important that if you are handling international cases, that you take advice and you think about the culture and the language and the systems that operate, because inadvertently, if we blunder on without taking care about our practice, we can leave lasting pain that can last for a lifetime. So it's really challenging work. So thank you to our panelists. And now I'm looking to Carolyn, who's the Chief Executive of Children and Families Across Borders, who's going to provide a finishing comment. And I'm looking for Carolyn to come up, and as soon as she is there, yes, hello Carolyn. We've been communicating by WhatsApp and in all sorts of different ways behind the scenes, thanks to the whole team that have made this possible, and it's gone smoothly. Mary Baginski dropped out, and I'm not sure what happened there, but if she has a presentation, I'm sure we can make this available. But Carolyn, over to you for your final words.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. I won't take too much of everyone's time. I'm sure we're all waning just a bit. Well done for making it this far. I really just wanted to reflect on the range of topics that we covered today, and those which we didn't get a chance to get into. So the voice of the child internationally is one, the role of the social worker in addressing issues of social justice, and how some social injustices can be prevented with a well-trained social workforce. And it's really worth thinking about all of these topics in a UK context and thinking about this in an international context, because as we know, neither families nor injustices nor pandemics stop at borders. As conference organizer, I hope that everyone will indulge me just 1 minute to tell you a little bit about CFAB. I've saved this to the end as the issues are more important than any one organization. Before I talk about CFAB, I do want to thank King's College London, and specifically the National Institute for Health Research, Health and Social Care Workforce Research Unit, for collaborating with us on this conference. Caroline Norrie in particular has been wonderful to work with. I want to thank our wonderful conference moderator, David Jones, who has not had an easy task today, and our various speakers who have joined us from all over the world. This certainly wouldn't have been as possible if we weren't all working remotely. So there's one silver lining with COVID. And just a really quick but very big thank you to Michael Nwoye, who has been supporting us on the technology side in the background. Michael is a CFAB social worker, not an IT specialist. And he has done a really incredible job getting us through Zoom technology, and particularly having this sprung on him so last minute. So just to tell you a little bit about CFAB. CFAB is the UK member of International Social Service, as we've mentioned. ISS is a network of social workers and lawyers and other child protection professionals in over 130 countries around the world. ISS was established in 1924, so a bit older than CFAB, in Geneva, and is the only international network to focus on inter-country social work. ISS and CFAB became an accredited member of the Commonwealth this year, and we hope to use this status more in the future in order to improve child protection cooperation amongst these countries, given how many of them are not actually party to the Hague Conventions that we were mentioning earlier. Michael, if I could have the next slide, please. So as the only UK charity with a qualified team of international child protection professionals, we help vulnerable children reunite safely with family, working in collaboration with a variety of agencies. And David mentioned earlier the Central Authority. I know we have colleagues from ICACU, which is currently the Central Authority for England and Wales under Brussels II, and will be the Central Authority under Hague for England. And alongside ICACU and IAC and many other organizations, we do our best to share information and to work collaboratively so we get the best results for children and families. Michael, if I can have the next slide. Here you'll see the variety of support that we provide to social workers and lawyers in the UK and abroad. I won't go into detail about all of our services, but I would say that a great starting point is always our free advice line. It's currently funded by the Home Office of the National Lottery, and the majority of the calls that we take on our advice line are actually referring on to other support agencies, so that social workers or lawyers and family members can best navigate international casework. Michael, if I can have the next slide. So please do give us a ring on our free advice line if you need guidance on international casework or help with any of the services that I listed earlier. If you'd like to stay in touch with us, please sign up to our newsletter via our website or follow us on social media. I know a lot of people have been asking about conference slides. They will be sent out. I will do my best to get them out within the next hour since everyone is so keen. And if you do want a recording of the conference, sign up to our newsletter and we'll keep you updated that way. This has been a lot for us to organize. We're a very small team at CFAB. It's been a lot for us to organize at very little cost to you. And we do this to improve your understanding of international issues and to support you in your work. So please do fill in the feedback form when I send it to you. Tell us what you want to hear about in the future. I hope it's been helpful to everyone, and I will just say thank you for staying with us, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. And wherever you are in the world, have a good day. And thank you, Carolyn, and the whole team for organising this. Let's hope it helps to improve practice. And glad to see so many positive things coming back. Just perhaps a message that short, punchy presentations can be better than long-winded ones, but we'll see. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. And goodbye from CFAB in the UK.